So good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. Just to make some brief introductions, my name is Scott Williams. I'm the President and CEO of the Ivero Group. And here with me today, and we are very lucky, we have the man that knows more about phone systems than I think anyone that I've ever met. We have Rick Koenders with us, who is a Vice President and Senior Partner at bluArc Hosted Business Phone and Internet Services. Welcome, Rick.
Oh, thank you very much, Scott, and welcome to our attendees, and thanks for attending on a Friday before Thanksgiving.
Absolutely. It looks like we've got a lot of people online today, which is great. So I guess today, just to set this up, is that we're really looking at, as the slide says, the reality of business phone systems. So Rick, I am going to do my best to test your knowledge today. And realistically, what we're really looking to do here is get well beyond the dial tone, if you know what I mean. So I guess we're going to go to the first slide. And here's the first question I've prepared for you. And if I can get this to work. So the history of PBX and cloud phone systems. If you could fill us in a bit on this, because it looks like we're, I think at this point, revisiting the past, are we not? If my recollection serves me well, we've gone from cloud to PBX and back to cloud. And I think that's one of those buzzwords also, cloud, is that people are very interested in these days. So can you explain a little about this for me?
Yeah, in fact, a short while ago I did another webinar, and it's basically back to the future again. So if you take a look at current PBX systems, for the people who have been around longer than 20 years or so, PBXs actually were in the cloud. Phone companies delivered phone services to businesses and to residences. And it was only in the last 20 years or so that phone systems actually moved from the carrier to a customer's site, something we call CPE, customer premise equipment. So the original cloud was in fact the telephone company. In fact, residential services now are still delivered from what we would call the cloud. The reason why PBXs did come along as new technology was because carriers couldn't really deliver the flexibility, the services, or the cost and price points that businesses were looking for. So it gave an opportunity to companies like Mitel, Nortel, Avaya, many others to build these boxes that effectively allowed businesses to become telephone companies in their own right.
Now, you bring up a really good point. Why in earth would any company want to be their own telephone company?
Well, I don't think companies really want to become their own phone company, but the reality is that carriers 20 or so years ago just didn't have the capability to deliver the services that businesses were actually demanding. Now, the reality of it is a lot of businesses did become their own phone company, expecting that they were going to derive a whole lot of new services, big cost savings, lots of great things to help their businesses' communications. But the reality of it is that that didn't happen. And in fact, most businesses ended up with dial tone, a little less expensive dial tone, but dial tone nonetheless, because the complexity of the systems that they were deploying weren't just weren't manageable by them, especially small businesses. You can imagine larger businesses that could afford the resources to manage these phone systems. They certainly got some value out of it, but certainly small businesses, absolutely not. The thing I find is a lot of companies have these great PBX systems that have hundreds, thousands of features, but the ability for those small businesses to program, to utilize the features of that system, to deploy them and maintain them, just doesn't exist. And
well, you bring up a good point too, because and I won't mention any names, obviously, to protect the guilty, but I've been with companies that have an internal PBX system, and there was that one person trained on it several years ago that was the go-to person for the phone system. Then, oh my God, what? They left the company, and then it slides for a couple weeks, a couple months, and then suddenly somebody new joins the company, and everyone's looking at one another saying, "Do you know how to set up a phone on this person's desk? Who do we call? What? Oh no, that person left." So it is an interesting scenario when people become their own phone company, I guess. Which brings us to our next point, which is the reality of today's phone system. And I'm sure you love my slide here where it's the ongoing / vicious cycle of rip and replace. Explain to me I guess, the cycle of rip and replace and the costs associated with that? I know that, in the past I've seen companies spend so much money on PBX systems, and
Right.
as the years go by, obviously they become somewhat antiquated and they have to upgrade again. So can you, I guess, delve into that for me a bit?
Yeah, I certainly can. I in fact, many years ago, worked for a PBX manufacturer, and the objective of the manufacturer was is to cycle through selling hardware, selling systems, because that's where they made their money. And businesses were at the brunt of this business behavior. Basically, they were sold by a phone provider, a Mitel, a Nortel, to buy an extremely expensive system, ostensibly because the features and functionality were really going to help their business. They bought the box, they got trained on it, they got some benefit for a short period of time, and like you mentioned, then all of a sudden, someone in the office who knew how to program it would leave, and people were stuck with essentially dial tone. What I like to do when I go to a customer who has an old PBX system is ask them, you know those buttons on your phone that were supposed to be programmable? I bet you half of the buttons on that phone are from the person who had that phone prior to you. And in fact, if you press the top button on the left, you're going to get their wife or their wife's work or whoever it may be.
Absolutely.
So this is the cycle that businesses have gone through. They've become their own carrier. They've had to understand how phone systems work. They've paid a big amount of money for capital expenditures to get new phones, new systems that eventually die, and that asset is actually worth nothing. Not only did they not get the features and functionalities that they were promised or hoped for, all they ended up doing was getting dial tone, support and maintenance costs, the fact that they had to work with multiple providers, the PBX provider, the conferencing service provider, an LD provider, and they still had to deal with the phone company they were trying to get away from to begin with because of the cost and complexity of it. So although the intention was to change the paradigm, it didn't. And in fact, it's made it worse for small businesses, especially because the resources don't exist in that company.
So, well, you bring up a good point. I mean, here's a question for you: is that upgrades? I mean, aren't they included in a support contract? Like, say, for instance, like you have with like Bell or something like that, or?
Well, if you have an existing PBX and you choose to upgrade it, which many businesses don't do because of the complexity of it or the fact that they don't even know they should be upgrading it, it's an extremely high cost.
Really?
And they are not included. So it's something net new that you would have to pay for if you wanted to upgrade that system. But as I said, most people don't, because after a couple of years of a new PBX system, they've lost essentially all value because they don't know how to program it, they don't know how to use it, they don't know how to integrate it into their business. It's dial tone, and why would I pay more money because my dial tone's working, right?
Good point. And now that we've mentioned actually a big company such as Bell,
right,
let's go on to the next question of what happens when a giant dies. And I don't want to mention any names. We'll just say it rhymes with Zortel. But explain to me what happens in that particular case, because if we're talking about you have these huge systems and you have all of these processes tied to it, and suddenly the provider is, as we've mentioned, dies a horrible and painful death. Right. Where does that leave you as the end user for this product?
Well, you talked earlier about the rip and replace, the vicious cycle of rip and replace. That all of a sudden becomes compressed. So you may have bought one of these existing PBX systems from Zortel or other companies that may not exist now. And now you're stuck with having to make a decision. Do I hang on to this thing in hopes that it continues to work?
Well, right, because as you said, I mean, if we look at, yes, we plan on buying a new phone system 10 years from now, and we happen to buy one 18 months ago and spent a ridiculous amount of money on it, suddenly we're right back at square one, and that we're going to spend the same amount again within a short period of time.
And worse, you're stranded with a platform that isn't going anywhere, and it's worth nothing. If you try to resell what you have, even if you bought it 18 months ago, there's just no value to it. That's the challenge of buying a PBX. You literally are stranded. You're literally in a rip and replace cycle, and you're at the mercy of your provider or providers, because it's not just the carrier, it's not just the Zortel, it's also the guy that pulls the system out of his trunk and attaches it to the wall of your business. He's involved in the chain now as well.
Right.
So you've got these poor businesses that are really in a bad position, not knowing what to do with investments that essentially have become stranded.
And I think the thing is too is that, and I'd love to get your insight on this. Is that especially in the last, we'll say, I'll say 15 years, but really, especially in the last 5 years, as we've seen technology take such huge jumps forward,
Right.
and how, we look at just, I'm not outside of even phone systems, but it's the phone systems to this day still are an integral part of business process. And what happens when you have a legacy system sitting in your office somewhere in a back closet is that how do you adapt to changing technologies and changing processes and things with something that no one ever thought of that 10, 15 years ago when you bought your system? I mean, I'm sure that's something that you see, is it not, from that perspective, where people are looking more from their phone system than just a dial tone?
That's the reason why they went to PBXs, and unfortunately that hasn't happened. But what do you do if you want to add new or differing technology? You rip and replace, literally. And that's the cycle that we always talk to customers about getting out of. Why do you want to keep going through that just because you want to leverage some technology?
Right.
We're saying don't do that. There's a better way of doing things where you can leverage technology on an ongoing basis without having to make significant capital costs. And in fact, in many scenarios, you don't make any capital investments. It's just an ongoing service fee, which you pay in any event.
Well, let's talk to that, because that segues perfectly into my next slide, which is where do we go from here? What is the solution to move forward? I mean, obviously we're seeing, large companies disappearing. The economy is obviously something that drives businesses just from an expenditure cost. They want more out of their systems. They want to ensure that they have the ability to adhere to business process and continually build business process. So let me know where we go from here, I guess.
I don't think there's a ton of options, quite frankly. I think there's two. There's certainly some hybrids that may fit in the middle of it, but you can stay on that cycle of rip and replace. You can buy a new box on a wall. You can train someone in your office to operate that box. You can get your support from one of the traditional PBX suppliers, and you can hope, again, that you're going to get some additional value out of it, that you're going to be able to leverage it into your business practices. Or you can move to what I call the hosted PBX offering, a solution that grows with time, that adds new features and functionality, that is designed with simplicity in mind, allows you to easily integrate functionality into your overall business processes.
Well, and again, it's like you're reading my mind here, Rick, is that really, what makes a good solution? How does the hosted approach make life better? And this is the thing, is that I have a bit of a background in telephony as well from my previous life, if you would, at companies. And I know that you and I, just at lunches, we've had this conversation before as well, is that the form and function of the newer technology and the hosted approach adds very much, we'll say, flexibility, if you would, to your business process. And I know that, I was lucky enough to sit in on a webinar about a month and a half ago that bluArc had with you partnered with Andrews and Company, which was a chartered accounting firm. And it was a really interesting webinar, even from a cost perspective, is that, they sort of reiterated what you were saying, is that even the tax benefits of, teleworkers and remote locations and joining all of those things together. Can you speak to some of that, as far as why that makes life better, I guess, in many ways?
Yeah, in some ways that takes us right back to the very first question about cloud computing and how PBXs came to be. Now, the reality of it is, when I talk to businesses, they don't want to be phone companies. The only reason they was because they were trying to reduce costs, increase functionality, give them some control over their communications. The paradigm has changed. The reason why PBXs came to be no longer exist, because hosted systems now offer all of those things and more. They offer reduced costs. They offer greater flexibility, the ability to manage and maintain remotely, extremely high availability. One thing we don't often talk about is they're in fact more available, more reliable than your existing PBXs because they don't exist on your site. They don't have to worry about the vagaries of cable connections on your site, of whether your building starts on fire, whether you lose power on your local site. Mm-hmm. These systems are all abstracted from that, making them much more safer and much more reliable.
And that's, you bring up a very good point there, and I don't mean to be, overly morbid on a Friday morning before a long weekend, but it's the the concept of business continuity and disaster recovery, I think, is on everyone's mind. And as you mentioned it, we don't have to get into the the world of politics and foreign policy here. I mean, as you said, it's what was it? Not more than 3 weeks ago, there was another just minor earthquake just in our area of Ontario and Quebec. And it's the, we didn't see any buildings obviously collapse or anything, but it's fairly simple to think that, something within your building shook loose or something fell off an old rack somewhere. And just the concept of even that from a business continuity perspective, I would say means a lot. Now, in your experience, is business continuity something that people are obviously concentrating more and more on these days as a part of their ongoing business process?
Yeah, business continuity, but in a couple of different ways. I mean, the business continuity that we often think about is what happens if my facility is no longer habitable. People focus more on that when it actually does happen. It's like, no one thinks about a pound of prevention. But, in fact, we've had customers whose buildings were flooded, who've lit up on fire, and we've had press articles written about our service, and other hosted PBXs, I imagine, would...
Well, yeah, you had mentioned that. You had a client that their building had burned down, and the only service that was maintained throughout all of it, which actually I think greatly helped that company survive through that horrible disaster, is the fact that their phone lines were up and running through the entire event.
Absolutely. We got a quote from a customer that actually said it was a miracle. Now, I won't attest to the fact that whether it was a miracle or not, but the reality of it is that their business continued. The second part of the continuity question is simple things like, what if you have a snowstorm? What do you do? More and more now, businesses are planning they're building their disaster plans, saying, can my staff work remotely and as effectively and communicate as a team, even if they have to work remotely like that?
It's interesting, I mean, not to perpetuate any Canadian stereotypes, but let's face it, there's, I know the other day my wife and I were just even checking online to see what kind of winter this is going to be. Are we going to have another 20-foot high snowbank in front of our house, or are we going to feel like we live in Seattle with a just freezing rain and rain all winter? And it is something that perhaps a lot of people don't take into consideration, is that as cities grow, people move to the outskirts of the cities. You may live downtown, and one major snowstorm and suddenly none of your staff can get into work. It doesn't necessarily mean that business is supposed to stop, I guess, if you would. So there's that scenario.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor the point, because it's relatively simple to understand that a system that's located in a secure facility with power and battery backup will have greater availability than a box located on your site. Absolutely, that's the case. But the whole concept of untethering your communications from your business, allowing you greater flexibility to communicate across boundaries, borders, people working at home, pick your location, but still communicate as a whole. That's the promise of hosted telephony, and that's what our customers are doing now.
Well, interestingly enough, I had the opportunity to sit in on your webinar last week, where you had partnered with Nitro IT Business Solutions, speaking about cloud services and the concept of hosted exchange, which they do. Is that, again, this is one of those things that fit into that category. As we see technology change and the concept of being able to access anything anywhere, it's very much, I mean, a phone system, and correct me if I'm wrong, but is, as a critical system, you can move it into the same realm as you would if you went to a hosted exchange scenario, or people store their files online, and we see like all of this, again, separating the the core of businesses outside of the building from that particular case, so people can access anywhere, anytime. And I noticed that, even in your wonderful logo, you have the connect everyone everywhere, Sarah, as your market positioning, which
Absolutely.
I think probably, I guess, speaks to that, is that you have the ability to literally, plug in a phone from your home office, if you'd like, from a hotel room, and you're suddenly connected the same as you would be sitting at your desk in a 20-foot or a 20-story office building, right?
Absolutely. And in terms of when we get to talking about what does make a good solution, I'll dig into that just a little bit more. But a hosted solution for telecommunications for small business is, in my opinion, far more profound than even hosted services like Exchange. The reason is that it's traditionally been so difficult to integrate telecommunications within a small business that especially has multiple sites or people who may choose to work remotely, because the networks don't exist, the technology doesn't readily exist. I've seen businesses with 4 or 5 locations, each one of them running a PBX, and many of those not even being the same one. Imagine trying to connect those over any type of network.
And that
it just doesn't work.
and that also must just affect a company's ability to grow. You would think, that's it's such a major decision to say, hey, we want to open yet another office, not only just within the same city, but even the same region.
Yep.
As major metropolitan centers grow exponentially every year. It must be so tough to say, yeah, it's no problem that we go rent this other office space, but oh my God, it's going to cost us so much to put in yet another phone system. And then it is, like you said, it's the hassle of trying to connect everything. And which actually leads me to a question that just popped up here. And I think this segues really well, is that, and this is one I'm sure you've heard a lot of times. It reads, my network IT guys are telling me they can do this in-house with some new, I guess, Cisco kit, or, how is this better?
Okay. Well, what we hear a lot is, first off, most small businesses I deal with don't have an IT person. That tends to be a medium-sized business, which we deal with quite frequently as well. Those medium-sized businesses that have IT people that want to try and deploy communications over multiple sites and locations, I say to them, good luck. Can you do it? Yes, you can. But what you struggle with is the cost and complexity of deploying it, because now you have to create tethered connections back to each one of your sites. You have to work through the technology to try and connect them. You have to work on the reliability and availability of those connections and the quality of service across those connections to ensure that when you do try to communicate with each other, it actually has something that sounds reasonable to the English language. It's a complex thing to do. One customer in particular that we deal with that has locations actually all across Canada, they had deployed a network across Canada from Bell that ostensibly allowed them to run their voice communications and data on the same network, where quality of service was supposed to be managed. An MPLS network is the technical term. It was costing them tens of thousands of dollars a month in network costs alone. We were able to do that similar type of technology in the low thousands, $2,000 or $3,000. The ROI for that type of company was huge.
And if I may speak to this as well, just as the introductions at the beginning, as a CEO of a company, the ongoing conversation as well is that I have with our CTO on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, is that the last thing I want him doing is concentrating on something like a phone system.
Right.
I've got way better things on my mind, and so does he, that are time sensitive and business critical to us.
Right.
And it goes back to, again, what we were talking about in the beginning, is that I'm not in the phone business. Therefore, I don't want to be running a phone company internally, and I certainly don't want to be spending. And you mentioned, it's obviously reducing the overall cost of the network consumption and everything else, but it goes, I think, far beyond that. Is that from a business process perspective, and having the allotted internal allocation of resources that that you need every day to just do the business that you do.
Right.
You don't want, so just the time and energy and money spent on concentrating on other things, I would think would be ridiculous.
worrying about the hardware platform, the connectivity of the platform, the carrier that you have to deal with, versus the value that the system actually can bring to your business from a functional perspective.
Mm-hmm.
That's the paradigm that needs to be changed. And that's the promise of hosted PBXs, is that you don't worry about the technology. You focus on how that technology applies to your business. How do my businesses communicate with each other? Can it be done easily and readily? Mm-hmm. And when I do that, what other things can I do to distribute my resources more effectively? One business I deal with revamped the structure of their business because communications from site to site became seamless. They moved all of their support resources to a single location and put more sales resources out in the field. Mm-hmm. Stop duplicating resources. And
well, that's an excellent point, because I think, again, if we look at the legacy systems from, the large companies and things, is that realistically their slogan should be, you can have any color you want as long as it's black. Right. I think all of us have been slaves, if you would, to the legacy providers, in that we had to bend our business processes to their system. Right. To me, it should be the other way around. You should be able to configure your phone system to meet your needs easily, rather than have to say, well, okay, I guess, compromise is needed because it just won't do this, so now we're going to have to change our business model slightly to accommodate it.
Yeah, traditionally when people bought PBXs, the question that they were asked is, how many phones, handsets do you require, and how many lines?
Right.
Well, you know what? That's not the right question. The question is, how does your business do communications, and how would you like your business to communicate? Internally, externally, with your customers? What do you want that look and feel to be from your communications solution? Not lines, not phones, none of that stuff. The dial tone is inconsequential. You need the dial tone, but boy, oh boy, wouldn't it be nice if you had a provider that could actually help solve business problems?
And that brings up an excellent point, and this is something that I can speak to as a marketing communications firm. It is our job to build brand, and a lot of the times, speaking aside from what I think most people think of as brand is just logo, colors, and what your website looks like.
Right.
It goes far beyond that, and it speaks to the relationship that you have with the company that you're dealing with, right, as a client.
Right.
So if you're deploying this type of scenario within a company, you think about, in this day and age, again, we talk about changes in technology. We look at just even, and I'll give you an example, how people use social media on a daily basis. Now, let's think of it just from, if you have the ability to answer the phone from anywhere, anytime, and that gives your clients that warm and fuzzy feeling, it goes a long way to perpetuate a good brand image, and people believe in your company and they trust in your company. And the minute that you let somebody down, is that social media, everything from Twitter to Facebook, lights up with people talking about companies and how terrible they are and things. So this, again, I think, to me at least, has far such a farther reach, if you would. Just outside of the, again, as we said at the beginning, we're going far beyond dial tone here. Yeah. Is that the ability to, again, create business processes that make your clients happier. The fact that if they have an issue and they can call your company and they know someone's going to be able to pick up the phone, and regardless of snowstorms or earthquakes or just offices, time zones, anything. Again, I guess you really are connecting everyone everywhere from that perspective, as your logo says.
Yeah, and there are a ton of implications. If most small businesses never ever thought that they could have telecommunications services similar to larger businesses. Mm-hmm. And you know what? You can, and in fact, a whole lot easier than larger businesses actually can even implement their own telecommunications services. But you talk about some of the social implications. One of our customers has a paradigm where they choose to hire people who would like to work at home or are unable not to work from home for whatever reason that may be, and they distribute their services to these people, and it's really changed the paradigm of their business.
Right.
They're getting resources that are distributed across time zones. They're getting people who are extremely capable but would otherwise not have been able to work in a business environment. So it's changing the way businesses can do business. That's what a hosted model promises. It's done quickly, it's done easily, it's done cost effectively.
So I've got a couple really interesting questions coming in here. Is that, and this is an interesting question, is that what about my cabling plan and wiring? I'm sure you've heard that before as well. Is that, I guess when we look at the term of rip and replace, that brings up, I guess, a whole slew of mental images of suddenly it's the, are you truly just ripping a PBX out, or suddenly there's wires coming out of walls and everything else.
Right.
So in this particular case, can you speak to that?
Yeah, and step me back if I get a little bit too deep into it. I mean, it's an interesting subject for me. The new deployment of voice services tends to be on the same network as your existing computers are. And a lot of the customers we deal with find that confusing. So now I have one cable in my office that goes to my PC. I'm going to use that same cable for both my voice and data services. How's that going to work? In fact, some customers don't even think it can work, or didn't, and would deploy multiple cables to their office for IP-based voice communications, thinking that you could never let the two interact. You can, and in fact, new voice systems, the hosted PBX solutions, are designed to be able to run over the same infrastructure as your existing computing systems. A big advantage comes up, especially when you're building out new facilities. In fact, bluArc will be moving shortly, and we're building out a net new facility, and we're only deploying a single cabling infrastructure. We no longer need the traditional telephony infrastructure. We're going to share an infrastructure between our voice and data communications. So, in fact, it can be more cost effective. If people are looking at new cabling deployments right now, they'll also have a choice of Cat5, Cat5e, Cat6. Traditional deployments are Cat5 or Cat5e, which will work fine. Cat6 absolutely works, Category 6. For our solution and for most customers, it's actually probably a bit more expensive than what you really require. 95% of businesses that we deal with, their existing cabling infrastructure is suitable for voice over IP. Some of them do need, quite frankly, a little bit of infrastructure upgrade, but that upgrade would be useful in any scenario for the data environment.
So this leads into another question that just came up, is that, and I think this actually means a lot to people as well, is that, we talk about the rip and replace scenario. There's also just the rip and move down the street scenario, is that, as you just stated, is that, bluArc is a company that has grown exponentially over the last several years, and that you're moving into this new, beautiful, large facility. We have clients that are dealing with this exact same scenario, is that, despite the economy, there's companies that are doing extremely well. And as you grow and you grow out of space and you're busting at the seams, again, the thought of ripping and moving a phone system is just as much of a headache, I'm sure, as it is to rip and replace a phone system. And when you're moving into a bigger place, and you suddenly have, more people coming on board as employees, and you have, more and more people to satisfy even in that first week, right? The hardest thing to do is put a phone on someone's desk in their first week at work. Is that, how easy is it? So if say for instance, my company, hey, we're growing, we're moving down the street to a larger location. What is involved in a rip and move from a hosted perspective?
Well, what I always say to customers is that if you're planning on moving, and it's counterintuitive, you should really install a hosted VoIP solution, a hosted PBX solution prior to your move. And the reason you want to do that is because it's going to make your move a whole heck of a lot easier.
Right.
A lot of people want to take their existing PBX and move it with them, and I'm saying to them, you're just bringing your troubles with you. So this is an opportunity to avoid doing that, and we have many great examples of that. We work with a lot of companies that are growing and extremely successful.
Well, let's talk to this, because this is something that's interesting. I think that everyone can feel this pain, and this is a question I would really love an answer to.
Right.
How long does it take to literally rip and move a traditional PBX to a new building facility versus moving a hosted phone system to a new building facility?
Well, you've got to take a look at the whole stream of events, because with the traditional PBX system, you've got to get your carrier to put in new voice lines. You've got to get your PBX provider to prepare to package up the system that exists there currently, move it to the new facility, do integration testing, ensure that the cabling infrastructure is working properly,
Right.
and plug in the phones, and in many scenarios, make sure that the phone they plug in has the right port assignments back to the PBX. It's easily a week worth of effort of somebody within your company to arrange that type of move.
Well, and that can be a lot of downtime. I mean, a week for a company is...
It can not only downtime, but the complexity, and you alluded to it earlier, the complexity of doing it when you've got so many other things to worry about isn't worth it, because there's also a lot of costs associated with that move, because your carrier is going to be charging you a significant amount of money to move those lines over for you. Now, a great example for us is we had a significant sized company of 70 or 80 people move from one location to another, and literally for them, their move was having their users put their phone in a box, go to the new place, open the box, and plug in the phone. That's it.
That sounds terrible, Rick. My God.
Absolutely.
You mean I'd have to do the same thing as moving my laptop from desk to desk and simply plugging it into a cable? My God.
Yeah. Well, sometimes we have to put A and B logos on the cord and the wall socket, but aside from that,
wow,
it truly is that simple.
Excellent.
Deployments themselves are fairly simple as well.
Excellent. So we have another question actually that just popped up online. Can it be a Cat6 gigabyte network?
It can be a Cat6 gigabyte network. There are, that involves something called the Power over Ethernet standard. Again, I don't want to get into great details of it. But yes, you can deploy a gigabit network, but it requires a different base station on a phone. Answer is yes. It just requires a different bit of technology on the phone to be able to support that. And of course, your back-end switching infrastructure would have to be designed to support that as well. We don't see a ton of gigabit deployments, only because for traditional business users, that type of bandwidth just isn't required out to the workstations. We often see that in data centers, where there's high-speed communications requirements between their existing server infrastructure. But for those customers that want to do it, yes, you can. There are some additional set costs that go along with it, and switching infrastructure is a bit more expensive, but absolutely.
Well, now, this actually, I guess, would segue into my last slide, is that, and this is something that I really appreciate about your company, and I've put because free is better than cheap, is that I think it's absolutely amazing that you guys will actually do a complimentary telecommunications evaluation for companies that are looking for this. Is that, it's nice to know that, and again, I speak to this as being a CEO of a company, is that I can't make a business decision unless I have a number in front of me that states that this is a wise decision to make. And, I'm sure you feel the same way as a senior partner at a large firm. It's I very much would appreciate this in the sense that, hey, I know now that this is the right move for me, not only from a business process perspective and an ease of use perspective, but you can also show me, from a very black and white scenario of what is going to be best for me as far as the setup that I need.
Yeah, and there's certainly a couple of elements that you need to consider. For me, I think costs is really important. Businesses need to understand what costs they currently have, what costs they might see in deploying a new solution. But businesses also need to understand what benefits might derive from a new system and how those benefits would apply to their business. So the concept of going in and doing a complimentary evaluation isn't how many lines, how many phones. That's certainly part of it, but it's also like, what do you do? What is your business?
Well, it's really understanding the business process and what you can do to complement that.
Right.
And it goes back to that, the statement that we made before. It's not just you can have any color you want as long as it's black. Suddenly, I think for the first time, these companies can sit down with you and say, wow, you mean we can actually architect something that means something to us, that actually we can bend the phone system to our will and not the other way around, which is something that's
scary, huh?
Yeah. So I guess at this point, we're actually a little bit over time.
Right.
Is there anything you would like to sum up? I mean, obviously, you want to invite people to take part in this telecommunications evaluation.
Yeah, I'd certainly like people to do that. I wanted to talk briefly about things that people should really consider when they want to step into a different environment from
Absolutely.
an existing PBX to a hosted solution like bluArc's, for example. One thing that you want to take a look at is a concern that customers often raise with me is that I don't want my phone system running over the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? We actually agree. And what you should really look for in a hosted service provider is their ability to provide a private network that allows your voice to run over that private network, not over the internet. And the reason why we say that is because in the world of the internet, we can't control security, we can't control reliability, and we can't control quality of service of your phone calls.
Well, that's an excellent point, because you and I, again, over our many lunches, have had that conversation of
Right.
what is voice over IP. And a lot of the times people, there is a stigma that goes along with it. And I think a lot of it is left over sort of from the early part of 2001, 2002, when we really started to see sort of an emergence of voice over IP technology. And it was sketchy at best at times with some of the companies. But your approach is completely different. And I know that, in using your systems and things, it is... if we go back just to even the dial tone and quality of the call itself, it is always seamless. So that, obviously your approach is much different and falls outside of the realm of perhaps the preconceptions that people may have of a voice over IP scenario.
Right. In fact, I've always said that, back in 2005 when bluArc started, I would have never have joined the company had the quality of the voice services not been better, or at least equivalent, if not better, to what you would get in a PBX world, because I don't think that would be the right paradigm for business to offer services that were less than what they were currently getting. I always think that people should get more for less. I'd love to make that happen. And that's why I think it's important that people understand some of the technology behind how hosted services get deployed. Simple things like, is it an all-inclusive monthly fee? Where is your support? Is it live and local? And what is the experience of the provider that you're dealing with? The challenge that I often see is that companies that look to provide hosted PBX services oftentimes are IT companies looking at expanding their services, thinking that, wow, I mean, this voice is just another application on our network. It'd be nice if it was that. It's not quite that. Voice has a higher level of technical requirements than what traditional IT solutions would have. And so I recommend to people to work with providers that are telephone companies, not IT providers, because we understand how these things get deployed.
Well, that makes a very good point, right? Is that you always want to go with the people that have the most amount of experience, and that's what they focus on a daily basis, and it's not just 10% of their business model that happens to be sometimes maybe forgotten or...
Right. And look for relevant references. Are you a law firm? Are you an accounting firm? Speak to other companies that use that service. Look for references from your provider in your field. And that should give you better confidence in terms of what you might want to deploy.
Absolutely. So is there anything, would you like to sum up anything? I'll give you 30 seconds before we say our farewells today.
No, I think I've spoken long enough, but we'd love folks to take up our offer for an assessment. We certainly would be happy to do that. If you have any other questions, we'd be happy to speak with you about those as well. I'm always available. You can contact one of our offices and speak to one of our representatives who can put you in touch with me. Be happy to speak with you in more specifics about what bluArc can offer you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Rick. It's greatly appreciated. And thank you to everyone who has tuned into this webinar. Give us a couple days, and I'm sure this webinar will be on the bluArc site for you to revisit. And as someone that has worked with bluArc, I highly recommend calling the phone number, emailing the sales at bluarc.ca, or visiting the website at bluarc.ca/save to set up a telecommunications evaluation. It is well worth the couple hours that you will spend with the professionals of bluArc, because they really, really do know what they're doing. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great long weekend, and thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much.